The band had just struck the first note of the national anthem when it happened. In front of rows of officers, dignitaries, and solemn-faced soldiers, the four-star general paused mid-step. Then, in a move that startled even the press corps, he turned away from the casket. No one knew what was happening. Cameras swiveled. Whispered voices rose like a wave across the field. General Christopher Doyle, commanding officer, walked straight across the manicured grass, past rows of polished boots and dress uniforms, toward a man no one else had acknowledged. Standing just outside the gate was an old soldier, uniform faded, hat in hand, spine straight as a rifle. He didn't belong on any guest list, but the general saw something else, and in that moment, the entire funeral stood still. Because honor doesn't always come from protocol. Sometimes it walks quietly from the shadows, and the world finally notices. His name was Elias Rowe. He arrived alone that morning, early, as men of his generation often are. His boots were polished but scuffed, worn from years of wear, not parade ground shine. His uniform, though pressed, was outdated. A relic. The shoulder bore a patch, crooked, hand-stitched, with the name Margaret. She had sewn it herself, not long before cancer took her. Elias never let anything touch that shoulder but the patch. That morning, the breeze caught the hem of his coat as he approached the gate. A young soldier with a clipboard didn't even look up. "You're not on the list, sir." His voice was sharp, routine. "This is a closed military funeral." Elias offered an old laminated badge. It had yellowed edges and a photograph from another life. The soldier barely glanced at it. "Not valid anymore." Elias didn't argue. He simply stepped back from the gate, planted his boots, folded his hands, left flesh, right metal, and stared into the distance. He wasn't there to disrupt. He was there to remember. The flags waved behind the black iron gate, but Elias stood still, not because he was told to, but because duty doesn't end when your name fades from the list. It ends when you stop showing up. The funeral staff moved around him like he didn't exist. Guests in sharp uniforms walked by, flashing IDs and being waved through. Some looked his way, their eyes catching on his worn coat or his prosthetic leg. A flicker of curiosity, maybe pity, then they moved on. One young officer gave a half smirk. "Sir, you'll need clearance to enter. I'm sorry, but we can't make exceptions." Elias nodded once, not in defeat, but in understanding. He had heard no before. He knew how it sounded coming from young voices too new to understand what they were dismissing. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the gravel. He stayed at attention, hands behind his back, the patch on his shoulder fluttering slightly in the breeze. From where he stood, he could hear the movements of the honor guard inside. He wasn't bitter, not even angry, just still, like a statue left off its pedestal. Some things he had learned were worth standing for, even if no one asked you to. 34 years ago, in a dusty corner of Basra, Elias had dragged a bleeding man from the wreckage of a burning Humvee. That man was Captain Patrick Whitmore, now General Whitmore, the man lying in the flag-draped casket just a few hundred feet away. The bullets had cracked the sky that night, the air thick with smoke and blood. Elias had nearly lost his leg that day, but he'd gone back because Margaret had made him promise. "Don't leave anyone behind." Patrick had gripped his arm, blood soaking through his sleeve, whispering, "Don't let them bury me alone." Elias never forgot. He visited every year. He sent letters when he couldn't make it. And when the news came that General Whitmore had passed, Elias packed his old uniform, the one with Margaret's patch, and made the trip, alone by bus. He didn't come for medals or speeches. He came because a promise, once made, carries weight. Even when the world forgets, a soldier remembers. That's why he stood there now behind the gate, not to be seen, but because somewhere inside that white ceremonial canopy lay the man who had once wept in his arms under a desert sky. And Elias had vowed, "Not on my watch, not alone." A group of young soldiers ambled past, tossing around an energy drink, laughing too loud for the setting. One of them stopped. "Hey, who let Grandpa out of the museum?" The others chuckled. Elias didn't flinch. Another stepped forward, eyeing the patch on his shoulder. "What's that? A tribute or something?" he asked, squinting. He reached out and tapped it with 2 fingers. The fabric twitched under his touch. Elias slowly raised one hand. Not fast, not to strike, just to cover the patch. His other hand, metal and worn, remained behind his back. He looked the young man in the eyes, not with anger, not with shame, just a steady, unwavering calm. The soldier took a step back, the smirk fading from his face. None of them said another word. An officer nearby watched but turned away, scribbling on a clipboard. Elias remained motionless, because sometimes the loudest lesson comes from the man who says nothing. And in that silence, those young men began to understand what they hadn't been taught yet. Honor isn't loud. It stands where it must, no matter who's watching. Unbeknownst to the young soldiers or the funeral staff, someone had been watching. A captain, silver oak leaves on his collar, stood just within the shadow of the command tent. He hadn't said a word during the exchange, but his eyes never left Elias. When the young men walked away, embarrassed but unaware of the full weight of what they'd done, the captain disappeared into the tent. The ceremony began. The anthem played. Rifle salutes cracked the air. But something else was moving now, quietly, behind the veil of protocol. The captain made his way to the front, stepping past aides and officers until he reached the man standing at the center, the commanding officer of the day. He leaned in, voice low. "Sir, there's someone outside. I think you'll want to see him." The name he whispered wasn't on any official list, but it carried weight, a name wrapped in memory, bonded by blood. And just like that, everything changed. General Christopher Doyle didn't wait for a microphone. He didn't ask the master of ceremonies. He handed his white gloves to an aide, squared his shoulders, and stepped off the platform. The crowd murmured. Cameras tilted. Soldiers turned. No one knew why the top-ranking officer was abandoning his post in the middle of a state funeral. But Doyle didn't break stride. He crossed the field like a man with a mission. He stopped just inches from Elias. They didn't salute right away. They looked, really looked, at each other. One man wrapped in medals, the other wrapped in memory. Doyle spoke first, quiet, just for Elias. "I heard you wouldn't come," he said. "But he made me promise. If you showed up, it had to be you." Elias's voice cracked. "Had to be me for what?" Doyle turned slightly and nodded. An aide stepped forward, cradling a polished wooden urn. The remains of General Patrick Whitmore. Doyle placed it gently in Elias's hands. "He wrote it in his will," Doyle said. "Only one man could carry him to rest." Elias looked down, then back up. Around them, the funeral had gone still. No music, no applause. Just the quiet breath of a man who had kept his promise. The urn was heavier than Elias expected. Maybe it wasn't the weight of the container, but the years, decades of memory of promises carried alone. As he held it, his fingers trembled, then steadied. Doyle stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, not above, not behind. For the first time that day, the gate opened. Elias stepped forward, not as a guest, not as a stranger, but as the man chosen to carry a general home. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to, because every eye watched, every spine straightened, and every heart understood something sacred was unfolding. Doyle leaned close once more. "I was there, Elias. Basra. I was the second radio operator. You pulled me out too." Elias didn't speak. He just walked, step by step. The urn in his arms, the wind soft. The path ahead lined with those who now saw not just a relic, but a keeper of vows. As Elias walked, soldiers on both sides stood tall. Some saluted, others placed hands over their hearts. The same group of young men who had mocked him earlier now stood rigid, their laughter gone. As Elias passed, one stepped forward, just slightly, and whispered, "Sir, I'm sorry." Elias didn't stop, but he nodded. A slow, quiet nod that carried more weight than any reprimand ever could. The band remained silent. The only music was the soft shuffle of boots and the whisper of the wind. Together, Elias and General Doyle moved toward the altar. No podium, no speeches, just reverence. The urn was placed on the pedestal above the folded flag. Elias stepped back, removed his cap, and pressed one hand, his real one, over his heart. The silence became sacred. In that moment, no one remembered the clipboard at the gate. They remembered the man who stood his ground. The ceremony ended. Chairs were folded. Dignitaries departed. But Elias remained. At the